Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We are going to be covering different parts of the application this week in our various webinars. Today, I'm going to be covering the personal statement, diversity statement, and the Why Berkeley Law Statement. Tomorrow, we have another webinar talking about the letters of recommendation and the resume. And then our other webinar later this week is going to be diving into more of the numeric parts of the application, like test scores and your academic record and associated addenda with those. So to go ahead and get started, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Alice Young. I'm my pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Director of Admissions for Outreach and Recruitment. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Joseph.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Lindsay. I use the pronouns he, him. I'm also the Director of Admissions at Berkeley. Welcome.
Great. So we're going to be going through, there's quite a lot of information to cover in the hour session that we have. But we do have a Q&A feature at the bottom. So if you have a question that's come up that I don't cover, you're welcome to write that in to the Q&A, and Joseph's going to be helping me with that to answer some of those questions. And then we're also going to have time throughout our session as well to answer any of your questions, as many as we can get to during the hour that we have. To get started, I would like to acknowledge land and place. So we recognize that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with our values of community, inclusion, and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. As members of the Berkeley community, it is vitally important that we not only recognize the history of the land of which we stand, but also we recognize that the Muwekma Ohlone people are alive and flourishing members of the Berkeley and broader Bay Area communities today. So diving into the session and what we're going to be covering today, I'm first going to talk about the different pieces of the application and the narrative pieces and how the personal statements fit into that picture. The second part, I'll be diving into the personal statement, what we look for, and how to get started with writing that. The third part, we'll talk about the diversity statement. And our last section, we'll talk about the Why Berkeley statement and what we look for in that. And then we'll hopefully have some time at the end for any questions that you may have that's not covered in the session. So let's get started with talking about the different pieces of the application and how we review applications. So we review applications holistically, meaning that no one piece of the application is weighed over the others. So as you can see here, there's sort of a circle representing all of the different pieces. The top here are the narrative pieces. So you have your letters of recommendation, personal statement and addenda, and the resume. The bottom two pieces are the more numeric parts of the application, standardized test score, LSAT, GRE or GMAT, and then your academic record and transcripts. So why is the personal statement important? Understanding the roles of the written pieces of the application. How is the personal statement weighed by the admissions committee? And how and why do the written parts of an application make or break the application? So the personal statement is a vitally important part of the application. As a reviewer myself, this is what I first start reading when I review an application before I even look at the Credential Assembly Service Report, the CAS report, which would have your GPA and your LSAT score. So you can think of it kind of as an introduction to the admissions committee about who you are. And so you want to start this piece off really strong so that we want to continue reading and getting to know more about you in addition to that CAS report. Why is the personal statement so important or can make or break an application? It's really important for us to get to know you. If, say, for last year, we had over 1,000 applications to the law school, there are going to be very similar applicants with your same sort of index as far as GPA and LSAT goes. So your personal statement and the other narrative pieces of the application are a really important part in setting yourself apart and telling us more about yourself. So it is a very important part of the application. It absolutely gets read, and it's weighed sort of equally to the numeric parts of the application. So it's something you're going to want to set aside time to work on. What does the committee look at when we're reviewing applications? The very first question that we ask ourselves when we're reviewing applications is, can this applicant do the work? That's generally going to be demonstrated in the numeric pieces, the LSAT, your academic record over a number of years. And most people meet this basic criteria. The second point and the third point here are what you're hopefully going to answer for us in the narrative pieces of your application. And that's, what else will you contribute? Besides being capable and smart, which most of you are, what else will you add to our classroom, to the school, and to the study of law? And are you somebody that we need or want in our community? So let's start by looking at the personal statement. As a very general introduction, a personal statement is probably going to be between 2 to 4 pages. We actually allow up to 4 pages as our maximum page length, which is a little bit more than the standard 2-page limit that you'll see at most other law schools. The reason that we do that is because we don't have an interview process or any sort of additional information that we ask for outside of the admissions application. So anything you think the admissions committee should know about you should be contained in the narrative pieces, either in the personal statement or elsewhere. And at the end of the day, 2 pages double spaced is not really a lot of room. That's only going to be about 4 paragraphs. So we give you that extra space. We highly recommend using it if you can. Of course, if you feel like you've been succinct, you've included everything in a 2-page personal statement, you can absolutely apply with a 2-page personal statement and include maybe some of the other addenda that we're going to touch upon later. But definitely feel like you have the 3 or 4 pages to expand, and make sure that the committee knows everything that you want us to know about you within those pages. For those of you that might be applying to other kinds of graduate degrees like master's or especially PhDs, you might be familiar with a statement of purpose. Keep in mind the personal statement is not a statement of purpose. So for example, a statement of purpose is going to ask what you want to study, what kind of research you're looking to do, what faculty you want to work with, what is going to be your scholarly contribution to that field, and what you plan on doing with your degree once you have it. So the personal statement is not asking for this. Of course, read the prompt for each school. Some do have very specific statements or things that they're asking you to do, like why do you want to go to law school or our particular school? But for many and for ours, it's going to be a general statement, and we're looking for you to be more personal in that. So it's a time for us to get to know you as an applicant. So it should be reflective, meaning it's looking back at what you've done up until this point when you're applying, rather than looking ahead at what you want to do at a particular school or with your law degree, although you can certainly talk about that in the Why Berkeley Law Statement. So I've included our personal statement prompt here to the left, which is exactly what we asked for. As you can see, it's asking for your interests, background, life experiences, and perspectives. So the prompt is very open and broad, and so it really is going to vary as far as what you're going to talk about. The common question that we always get is, what are the things that you're looking to see in a personal statement, or what impresses you? It really is so diverse. Every person's statement is going to be different because you've all had different life experiences and are living different lives. So there is no sort of checklist that we're looking for with the personal statement. Hopefully, when we read your statement, we get a good sense of who you are as an applicant, what you've accomplished, what your interests are, your perspective, your background, but the content is really going to be different. So at the right here, I've included some things that generally we're looking for and that you can think about when you're writing your personal statement. So who you are in your own voice and how you came to be who you are, where you come from, what you care about and why do you care about it, how all of these parts, your identity or your journey, can shape your perspective, and why that perspective matters. What is going to be your contribution to our community? So before we dive into the writing process and how you can get started, I'll go over some general do's and don'ts, and I'll ask Joseph some questions about sort of good personal statements or bad personal statements. So do use your own voice. We're not looking for this to be a scholarly or academic paper. It really should be in your own voice and it should sound like you. Tell your own story. This is an important one. Advocacy is an important part of law school, but I think sometimes some of the personal statements that we read are talking about advocacy for another individual or for another group, and it ends up really becoming a story about that other person rather than you. So make sure you are the main person in your personal statement, and it really is a story about you or what you got out of a particular experience rather than focusing so much on maybe another person's obstacle that you're helping them overcome, or a project that you took on behalf of another person. Have a point and make connections. That's going to be important when we go to talk about outlining. How does everything fit together? Do you have an introduction and conclusion? Does everything sort of flow together? Maybe not. Maybe you want to use a different statement to talk about something else. Use anecdotes, not adjectives. I think that is pretty clear. We want to hear more about what you've done rather than just listing that I am, intelligent or smart or accomplished or dedicated to public service. Rather than telling us those things, what can you actually show us in those regards? Ask yourself what makes you different. Don't feel like you have to talk about a specific thing in the personal statement, but really just think about, with other people with similar profile, what makes me different that I can showcase in the personal statement? And as I already talked about, consider using all 4 pages because we give you that extra space in there. Some don'ts. Make grammatical or spelling errors. I think this is a given, but don't just use spell check. A lot of words might be spelled right and might not show up on spell check, but it's actually the wrong word. So make sure you're really reviewing for any of those grammatical and spelling errors. Don't use gimmicks or overused metaphors. For example, we've seen legal briefs. We really are just looking for standard essay format, standard, personal statement, and not those metaphors. Limiting yourself to law-related topics. So again, we're not looking for your experience with the law or what you're looking to do in law school. Of course, you can touch upon that if you've had a life experience that has really led you to go to law school. Many people talk about that, but don't feel like you need to just talk about everything that you've done that's law related, which sort of brings us into our last point. Don't write a narrative version of your resume. This is sort of my biggest sort of don't in this, and that I think a lot of people miss out on the opportunity in the personal statement for us to really get to know you beyond what is already in the other pieces of your application. And so they can write out a lot of what's already in their resume and just sort of very briefly expand upon those points. So an example would be, I went to this college and I majored in this, and this is when I started to get interested in law school, and I took these classes. And then I did this internship over the summer at a legal organization, and this is what I want to do in law school. That can easily fill up 2 to 4 pages. But it doesn't tell me what more than I could see when I already looked at your resume or when I look at your transcripts and see the classes that you're taking. So make sure you're including a much more substance and something that we wouldn't see elsewhere in your application. So before we go into the steps of writing, Joseph, do you have any sort of do's and don'ts that I didn't already cover, or things that have really impressed you about a personal statement?
Yeah, no, I think you addressed all of them. I know that we often see the Berkeley being misspelled.
Mhm.
I would likely try to encourage you not to even include a school name within the personal statement. And I'm sure you addressed that as well, but mainly because I sometimes have user error and I'll upload the wrong document. And so I'd rather that not be addressed to like the Alice School of Law, but it has the Joseph School of Law document, because it's just that attention to detail. I really agree with you to claim the, use your own voice and to claim the space. I was thinking back of one particular student I really wanted to join at law school. They really talked about their own personal experiences identifying as an Asian American student, but having to attend an undergraduate program where they really had to rediscover themselves because it was in an area that was where they recognized that they were a very member of a small community there. And so, but the advocacy, that level of desire to really advocate for themselves and their community was what really stood out. Ultimately, they didn't end up coming to the law school I was working at, and I was really bummed, but I knew who they, where they went. And so I kept in touch, but it was really cool. Like, those are the things I hope to learn and hear their voice through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard you tell that this story before too, is sort of about the Knox is the grandma example of, having this personal statement that talks about the accomplishments that somebody's grandmother, they were this big community leader and all these things that they accomplished, and then sort of bringing it back to like, and I hope to follow in that line of work, and this is why I want to go to law school. Which is like, wow, great. If I could admit that grandma, I would. But so again, so just making sure like you are the central character in the personal statement. So well, I won't take up too much time going into examples, but we'll sort of dive into how to get started in writing the personal statement. And I think the first point is just to start asking yourself some questions. We've made a list here of things to kind of get you started thinking, what ways will you make a significant contribution to the overall diversity of the class? Again, what makes you different than other applicants? Describe how you demonstrate strong potential for leadership. How is your academic achievement remarkable? Did you experience any social or educational barriers that you had to overcome? Why do you want to attend our law school? What would we want to know about you that is not elsewhere in the application? And if you already know what you did, your grades, your major, work and volunteer experience, etc., can you also tell us why you picked the things that you picked and how they relate to who you are, and where you're from? And then what would you tell me if you were able to interview? This is something that we talk a lot about in the admissions office when we're reviewing applications, is sort of when we're looking at those three questions we're asking yourself, there is sort of like a hidden fourth question along that, which kind of goes in line with the second and third question. But like, is this somebody we'd want to get coffee with? And if we were to sit down and have for 10 minutes over coffee, what would you want the admissions committee to know about yourself? So of course, your personal statement, the other narrative pieces, they're not going to cover every single question in here, but some of these might apply to you. So it's a good way to sort of get started thinking about what you might discuss. So once you started basically questioning, analyzing, you're going to want to just start making a list. So what am I about? What are my characteristics and attributes that I want the committee to know? What are experiences that have shaped my life or led to my desire to attend law school? Is everything on this list important to understanding who I am? And is what's important to understanding who I am on this list? I think that's a really important piece. And is everything on this list something that I'm comfortable talking about? So I'm going to kind of sidebar the conversation a little bit here, because that's something that is really important, is that your comfort level in what you're talking about in the personal statement. It is open for you to talk about whatever you would like. And we don't want you to open, prior traumas or feel like you have to talk about specific things in that personal statement. You really can talk about whatever you would like. So I think this is an important piece. It also brings us to a common question that we get, which is sort of, what is too much? Like, what is TMI in a personal statement? So Joseph, like, have you had experience reading a personal statement where you felt like it was TMI maybe?
Oh, 100%. There's always one each year where it's like, this is too much information. And I know that's the fine line, but I would say there's the couple instances where it was dealing with bodily functions. I mean, there's no other nice way to say it. And that was part of their personal statement. And I was not sure what the point of that was and how that helped, that perspective was mattered. So sometimes those tend to be the common ones I see throughout.
Yeah, absolutely. Just keep in mind we are humans as well that are reading your application. So if you are going to be discussing something more in depth, I think trigger warnings are particularly helpful. And I think, yeah, in general, uh, you don't need to go into extreme detail in what you're talking about. So just make sure it's something that you feel is appropriate to discuss in a law school personal statement. So it should be something, hopefully, that you'll be comfortable with sharing with a professor or somebody that's writing a letter of recommendation for you. Okay, so now you've been questioning, you've been analyzing a little bit, and you've started to make your lists. So now you can start to hopefully group things together. So what sort of experiences or attributes go together? Do you have big picture ideas or themes? For example, some overarching themes could be perseverance, overcoming, resilience, advocacy, curiosity, risks taking, leadership, entrepreneurship, etc. And how do these things work together to tell people who I am? Now you've sort of grouped, you can start thinking about using your space and where everything fits. By no means do we want everything about you in the personal statement. You have a lot to say, hopefully, and it might not all fit in the personal statement. So think about where the other information might fit. You might want to utilize your diversity statement, your why Berkeley law, and then there are also other addenda like the LSAT addendum or an academic record addendum. So don't feel like you have to fit everything in the personal statement. In fact, sometimes I think it can somewhat be kind of clunky if you're really focusing on personal, letting us know about yourself, and then you kind of have to feel like at the end, oh, and this is why I want to attend Berkeley Law and get involved. So in that case, you may want to just put that in a separate why Berkeley statement. And then keep in mind, of course, things can overlap across your different written pieces, but they shouldn't be redundant. So if you're adding a different statement, make sure it's new and unique information as opposed to kind of talking about the same subject over and over again in all of your different pieces. And then keep in mind, you don't have to include these additional statements if you don't want. If you have a personal statement that really kind of defines who you are and you don't want to include any of those other ones, you don't have to. We don't have a rubric that we're looking at, or like a checklist when we're reviewing that, like, okay, they included a personal statement. Okay, they included a diversity statement. Did they include a, fill in the blank statement? I would make sure that those things are covered in a personal statement, but if you don't want to use them, then don't feel like you have to. Okay, so now you're going to start to put the meat on the bones. So what are some examples and anecdotes to those themes that you kind of put together? What are some of the stories that you would want to tell to a committee that exemplifies those specific characteristics? And finally, you're going to want to start writing. So I included sort of a quick outline here of how you might get started. You're listing, you're outlining, you're filling out sort of your themes and your examples for those, and your introduction and how you might conclude and or relate it back to your introductory statement. And then you're going to want to start drafting. You are going to revise many times. And then once you feel pretty confident about it, I would circulate for feedback. So generally we say sort of if you can have 3 different people read it, that is what we recommend. So if you have somebody who knows you really, really well, so a family member or a partner or, a close friend that can read it and kind of then ask them those questions of, do you get a sense, do you hear my voice in this? Do you get a sense of who I am? Do you feel like there's anything that I haven't shared that maybe I should? So have somebody that knows you well read it. Have somebody that is you think of as a really good writer. So you have a professor or an advisor that you can go to read it, not only for content, but also for grammar and sentence structure. And then have somebody who you don't know very well read it. As the admissions committee, we're going to be reading thousands of applications, and we're not going to know you at all. So have somebody with no knowledge of you prior read it, and also ask them those same questions. And hopefully, with sort of that different feedback, you can then go back, work on redrafting, sleep on it. Don't rush this process. Really, think upon it. Some of my best ideas come at night. I don't know. I think the juices are flowing in your brain, and sometimes it's you sleep on it and you come up with a great idea, or think, no, actually, you need to change this. So give yourself some time to kind of sleep on it a little bit and think about it, refine, go through, and then finally submit. So talking a little bit more about editing, sort of in the editing stage of that, some basic things that you can look for: no incomplete or run out sentences, counting your commas, colons, semicolons, make sure you're using those appropriately. Maybe a sentence should actually be a semicolon or vice versa. Circle your starting words. Are you starting every single sentence with the word I? Making sure you're changing your sentence structure. Vary sentence length. I remember last year I read this personal statement, which content was great, but it was very short sentences. So make sure, you're going to have some shorter sentences, some longer sentences. Not everything is a very long sentence. If you have a whole paragraph and there's only 2 sentences there, maybe thinking about breaking those up so that it's easy to digest for a reader. And then avoiding the passive voice. Had is not your friend. So those are some basics that you can get started with once you have a draft. And then realizing that less is more. You don't need to go crazy with the adjectives. Again, we are much more interested in the anecdotes rather than the adjectives. We're not impressed with your prodigious lexicon, your proficiency with a veritable profusion of abstruse jargon, or your legal phraseology. Hopefully you see what I did there. So we really just want to hear, that you can write a good sentence and that we can hear you in the story and you have your own story to tell. Quality control, as I said, making sure you're sharing with others for their suggestions and feedback. Don't rely on spell check. Make sure you're really reading through every word on there. As Joseph mentioned before, a big one that we see, I would just recommend not using a specific law school name in the actual personal statement itself, or do so with extreme caution. The reason for this is that every year we see multiple personal statements that end with the statement of, and this is why I want to go to insert different law school name. That's really not, probably not going to bode well for the rest of your application. And keep in mind, even if you do find that and you submit a new personal statement, it can never replace your old one. That's always going to live in your application file, and we can certainly add an updated personal statement. But if you see that you've made a bunch of spelling errors and you go to update it, or you put the wrong school name and you go to update it, the reviewer will still probably read your old one and then take a glance at the newer one that you submitted. So unless you're very, very careful and you're saving each personal statement with the school name sort of in a separate folder, and when you're uploading, you're making sure to triple check that, you don't really need to put a specific school name. I would leave that for the Why Berkeley Law Statement. And then finally, read it out loud. Does it sound like you? Is your voice coming through? So once you've done all those things, in 8 easy steps, step 9 is finally to submit. So I'll sort of finish with the personal statement by sort of just going back. And as you can see, it takes a long time. You're going to be spending quite a bit of time working on this. And it is really hard actually to talk about yourself when you actually go to start writing down. And you'll probably have a lot to say. A lot of people want to just write the bare minimum 2 pages. But when you really get down to it, you are going to have a lot to say and to kind of think about where everything fits in your application. So my main piece of advice with that is just give yourself time to write the personal statement. It is a big part of the application. And I think too many times we see people that really dedicate all of their time to studying for the LSAT, which of course is very important. It's an important piece. And then they rush within a couple of days to submit the personal statement. And that's really not doing you any good in the application process. So make sure you're dedicating time specifically to think about those narrative pieces, circulating for feedback, editing, so that you have time to submit and you're not just kind of rushing at the very last minute to put together a personal statement. So before we move on, and I'll talk about the diversity statement and why Berkeley, did we have any questions come up specifically about personal statements, Joseph?
We do. We have some great ones. So that's why I wasn't answering any of the questions. So,
great.
So a very structured one is not to split hairs, but does the committee prefer, aside from four pages, font size, 12, 11, etc.?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Definitely double space. Please save our eyes. And then generally, I'd say like a regular margin, like an inch margin, and then around 12-point font, and in a standard font like Arial or Times New Roman. So,
okay. So I've read that it's best to stick to describing one experience in detail. This one was voted 4 times. So I feel the most honest way to describe what motivates me is through a series of experiences. How risky would it be to write the vignettes?
Yeah, so I think as long as you can relate them all together, that's fine. What I don't really like to see, and what I've started to see more, is like people writing separate stories as their personal statement. Like you've probably seen this too, Joseph, where it's like a couple paragraphs about one experiencing, and then it's jumping forward 10 years to talk about something else. And then there's like a third story about some, a different thing. But then there's nothing tying those together. And then you're sort of like, okay, well, I see all these 3 things, but I don't really know how they sort of intertwine. And so, I've seen some great personal statements that are talking about different experiences and sort of going into depth with those. But make sure you connect them together. That would be my biggest point. And feel free to expand on any of that, Joseph.
I mean, I totally agree. It's a best way to connect the dots if you are going to talk about these experiences and how they impacted you or help to shape your voice, and why these perspectives matter. But it really is telling the story. So one similar to that, though, because the question is that you highlighted between personal and statement of purpose. Can you speak to how appropriate it is to mention what field you're interested in, why? Specifically for applicants who feel these points are intertwined with their story and or background and what makes them different?
Yeah, that's another common question that we get. So yes, if you feel like your specific experiences have led to a particular area of law, you can absolutely talk about that. As long as you're relating them back to your own experiencing and sort of answering the why piece. I wouldn't really get too much into the nitty gritty of like the specific law school experiences. I would save that for the why Berkeley statement, and again, focus more on the personal piece. And so why did this experience motivate you to attend law school and, do a particular thing with your law degree? So we see that a lot, that like somebody's life experience has made it, had a really profound effect on them. And that is their reason for going to law school and why they want to become an advocate for others, or to seek justice for a particular issue. So you can absolutely talk about that. But yeah, I wouldn't get too much into the weeds of like, and then I want to do these things in law school or join these groups. I would save that for later.
One last question, because we still have some more, but this is a fun one because we all get this one. So when it comes to someone who's a Berkeley undergrad, is the law school going to have a high bar when it comes to students who did their undergraduate degree at Berkeley? And also to throw in the other question that we always hear is, I hear you all don't like Berkeley undergrads.
Yeah, the common question. So, yeah, so UC Berkeley is our most represented undergraduate school at the law school. So you would be in good company. We have a lot of double bearers, as we like to call them. So no, we wouldn't be looking at your application any differently than students applying from any other school. Obviously, UC Berkeley is a great school in that regard, but you don't get a leg up in the admissions process, and you certainly it's not going to be a negative that you attended Berkeley for undergrad. So no need to sort of approach the personal statement or have to like write an addendum specifically on that topic or do anything differently. And I guess what I also didn't say too is that you may want to write sort of two different personal statements. And this is something that you're going to have to factor in as far as your time planning as well, because ours and some other schools do allow for longer. You might want to work on sort of a longer personal statement and then also have your shorter 2-page personal statement that you can submit to other schools. So it's personal as a personal preference. Again, we do see some really great 2-page personal statements and have people that think, yes, I've included everything in here and I don't need to expand. But I would say probably the majority of our students do choose to use the additional page limit to let us get to know you a little bit better. So just factor in that time when you're writing those. Great. Well, we'll take a little break from the personal statement. And if you do have questions, feel free to write those in and we can definitely, answer them at the end too. So we'll talk a little bit about the diversity statement and what that is. So again, I've copied exactly what the prompt is for our diversity statement. So it's how will you, your perspective, experience, voice, contribute diversity in our classrooms and our community. Feel free to address any factors or attributes you consider important and relevant. In the past, applicants have included information about characteristics such as race and ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, socioeconomic background, first generation college or professional student, student parents, re-entry students, geographic diversity, ideological diversity, and many, many others. And that's a 350 word maximum. So it's going to be, a page or a page and a half max. So when thinking about the diversity statement, I would go back to your initial sort of brainstorming list that you came up with to talk about. And you might have set aside things that you want to cover separately in a diversity statement. So keep in mind our general tip of making sure it's not redundant information. So if you've already covered what you would want to say in a diversity statement, in the personal statement, you do not need to write a separate statement. It's not going to be held against you that you didn't write a diversity statement. We'll see that like, okay, it's covered, or maybe you just didn't need to write a diversity statement in this. So think about what would fit in there, or if you maybe want to expand on something that you had mentioned in your personal statement that you didn't get, a lot of time to dedicate to. And then the third point here, I think if you're unsure if you should write one, if you sort of read the prompt and you're like, well, I don't know if I would really want to write this, or would it be sort of inauthentic to do so? My recommendation is don't write one in that case. An inauthentic statement can definitely detract from your application. I've definitely read applications where, everything's going great, personal statement is great, and then I get to the diversity statement and I'm sort of scratching my head on like, okay, why did this person choose to write a diversity statement on this topic? So I sort of don't agree with, I think, a lot of the advice that's given out about, yes, you have, no matter what, find something to write a diversity statement about, because it actually can sort of backfire on you a little bit. So I'll kind of pick on myself in this example of like, I have red hair. That is a unique attribute in the fact that less than 2% of the world has red hair. Would I write a diversity statement about that? Is that necessarily something I've had to overcome or something that I would add to the law school community? No. So, just really think about, is this something that you've experienced that you've really had to overcome in some way, or that would be a big addition to the community and would really add to your experience at law school, to the discourse in the classroom, and to the greater legal profession. So I will pause for a minute to answer any questions that might have come up about diversity statement, or Joseph, if you had anything to add about diversity statements that you've seen that maybe have kind of made you question that particular applicant.
So there is a question here, my ethnic and cultural identity, but I also feel you addressed it already, is a big part of who I am as a person. So I wrote about this in my personal experience. Do you have any advice on how to separate this from the diversity statement?
Yeah, so if you feel like you've talked about it in the personal statement, you don't feel like you need to write any more about it. But if you want to tell us a little bit more about that, about your family background or different sorts of stories, you're welcome to. Just make sure you're adding to what you've said and not just sort of restating what you've already talked about.
So there is a question about why Berkeley, so I'll leave that one. There is an interesting one though, because there's actually 3 other questions related to it. You mentioned trigger warnings or trigger things within the personal statement, and now someone is also asking about, if we include in the diversity statement, maybe things related to mental health or certain things related to upbringing. Like, what are the thoughts about including those as it relates to perspective or, what you bring into the classroom?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what exactly you're talking about and how much detail you're giving with it. But certainly if you feel like it is something that could be potentially jarring or could affect a reader, I would say to include one. I mean, I would appreciate it as a reader. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Joseph.
No, I 100% agree. I think even the questions that were asked about how you should approach it, even in a personal statement, I think it's important because this is your space, and that you should, that I think you should feel comfortable in that space to be able to write about what has impacted you to help shape your identity and your voice. And even in the diversity statement, I think that it's the follow through that we hope to see though through these statements that show how you've become a stronger advocate for yourself or for your community. That is where sometimes where we may see these statements just be, this is what happened, and then that's it, where we hope to then, okay, well, what did you do to overcome, what were the resources, how did you help others, etc. Just trying to learn those other pieces with regards to those narrative pieces, I would guess.
That's great advice.
I don't see any. Oh, wait. Do you recommend writing specific attributes of Berkeley in the diversity statement, such as LGBTQIA+ student organizations?
Yeah, you're welcome to tie that in into your diversity statement, or you can set it aside for the White Berkeley. But yeah, if it's pertinent to what you're talking about, and you're saying, I'm looking for a support network, and this is why joining, Queer Caucus at Berkeley Law, if that's what I'm looking forward to doing, yeah, you can absolutely write about that.
And then one last one. So some of these are still related to personal statement, but
okay.
If you allude to belonging into a certain affinity group or other diverse community, is it expected to write a diversity statement to elaborate further, or is it acceptable to mention this type of membership without writing a diversity statement?
I'm not really sure if I understand the question. That if you alluded to something in your personal statement or in the Why Berkeley statement, or
I would imagine maybe they mean, I'm hoping they mean within the resume, because then I don't know that it would be necessary because it's there, but perhaps I'll find out. I'll dig deeper and ask.
Okay. Yeah, we've got plenty of time left. So hopefully, yeah, I'm not quite sure if you mean like if you were alluding to joining something at Berkeley Law that you would need to clarify, or a prior experience. So that, I guess that sort of ties into our last section, and then we'll have the rest of the time for questions. And that's the Why Berkeley Law Statement. So again, I'll read the prompt as it's listed in our application, which is, tell us more about your interest in Berkeley Law. What makes our school a good fit for you in terms of academic interests, programmatic offerings, and the learning environment. And that also has a 350 word. So this is the statement that I think is, I do like to see that in applications. So it is highly recommended that you include it or talk about it in your personal statement somewhere to tell us a little bit more about why you're applying to our law school. So I sort of see it as serving two purposes. The first is telling us more about yourself and your interests. And it shows us that you've, done a little bit of research about our school and can kind of see where you would fit in there. And then the second is it actually helps us as well. If you are admitted, we use some of what you talked about to match, to better match you with faculty or specific students later on down the process when they may be reaching out to you. So if there are specific organizations or journals or anything of that nature, it is helpful for us to read about that in the statement. So specific tips when you're looking at the Why Berkeley statement. Number one, do your research. You're already attending our webinar today, which is a good starting point, and we have some others coming up. We have a lot of information on our website and in our online prospectus as well. So I would start with that of just, why are you interested in our school? And then you can think about the things that you might discuss that you would like to get involved in. So generally, it is a shorter statement. So I would choose like one to maybe two or three things that you kind of want to focus on in this. And the types of things you could talk about would be curricular interests and classes. We don't expect you to know your exact curricular interest coming into law school. So if it doesn't apply to you and you're not really sure yet, then you don't have to talk about that. But if you are, you're super involved in your, works labor union and you know that this is what you want to do, then you could talk about, specific classes and this is what you are really going to law school for. Faculty and research, is there a particular faculty member that you'd like to work with or take a class with? Centers, we have many centers and institutes at the law school as well. And so is there one that really stands out to you or you've seen a particular event hosted by that center? Experiential education is a big one we see listed a lot. So if there's a specific clinic or a pro bono project or field placement that really appeals to you, you're welcome to write about that. And it could be more broad, like geography and culture. So maybe you really want to be in the Bay Area. You're looking to practice law in California after you graduate. The general, student culture, our grading policy, and the fact that we have no A through F grades and no GPAs, or maybe other student life or student organizations that you'd really like to be a part of. And then if there's any other factor that may contribute to your school selection. So if for example, you're applying with, a partner or a spouse, you can let us know about that. Or if you have family in the area or your spouse just recently moved to the Bay Area and is working here, and so you really would like to be in the Bay Area, you can definitely let us know about that in the Why Berkeley statement. So that's where I would sort of mention that. And then just a final thing to note that kind of ties into that and that we sometimes get questions about is that we don't track interest at all. So while we do want to see that you are interested in our law school and can kind of see what you would be involved in at the law school, as far as admissions, we don't track your involvement in anything. So your webinar attendances, if you talk with us at a fair, or if you reach out to our students or faculty or anything like that, those are all there for opportunities for you to get to know us more and ask specific questions, learn more about our admissions process like we're doing now. But we don't track that in any way. So don't feel like you have to list all of those or that you're going to be at a disadvantage if you haven't visited campus. That's a big one. Every year we have students that join us that have never been even to California. So don't feel like you have to go out of your way to come and speak with us as part of your application. So that is sort of the end of the presentation. And we do have 10 minutes left. If there's any other questions that came up about why Berkeley or going back to any of the prior two sections.
Sure. Okay. So I'll try to get through some of these and I apologize. So One was, I think, maybe trying to get some more clarification. It says you encourage applicants to describe what they've accomplished in the personal statement, but you also state that you're not looking for a description of experience in our fields, question mark. I think they're just trying to elaborate as far as, I'm hoping I understand this correctly, that you're not looking for description. So I guess they want to just a little elaborate more further on that personal statement. How do you incorporate the experiences within, the statement itself? Pretty sure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think I understand the question in that, yeah, I mean, we're not looking for like a long list of all that you've done. And we're not looking for you to have like prior legal experience. So we have people that come in that have, accomplished quite a bit in sort of their given field or in their work experience that's not law related. So we are looking to see what you've accomplished, but we just want to make sure you're giving us those anecdotes, those stories, and rather than sort of making it more of a list or what you think that we are looking for when we're reading that.
So do you have any advice for reapplicants in regard to the narrative portions of their application?
Yeah, so actually a couple months ago did a whole session just on reapplicants and going into each of the narrative pieces. So it's posted on our webinars page on the previously recorded sessions. So I'd encourage you to do that. I think mainly for reapplicants, it is important to go back into those narrative pieces. Now you have the extra time to work on those before you submit. So if you are really confident in your personal statement from last year, you don't necessarily need to redo it, but it might be a place where you want to update or expand and submit a different statement. So I'd encourage you to go check out that other webinar for more information.
So for the personal statement, this I kind of like to, do you believe it's a good idea to start with a metaphor in the first paragraph? Or is it recommended that applicants should deliver their message right away instead?
What do you think, Joseph?
I've read one too many Gandhi quotes, one too many MLK quotes. If anything, I think this is the space for you to own it. If you're related to MLK and they told you some great things and that's what influenced you, perfect, use it. But this is really a time for you. So the one I love the most, they graduated, they wrote, "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." The mom would sing the song to them, and there was a story behind it, and that led into all of the reasons why they went to law school, and so that differed. But I would own, I probably would avoid those metaphors.
Yeah.
Let me see. Sorry, they're filling in. Oh, they really filled in. So some people have received some conflicting information as to whether or not the why Berkeley, even the diversity is necessary, and if it should just be included in the personal statement. Do you think it needs to be conveyed in the personal statement to be effective? Is it maybe not necessary? Does it feel forced or inauthentic? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I talked about this before, but yeah, I think for a lot of people, they talk about it separately in the Why Berkeley statement, unless you can really weave in your narrative piece along with the why law school, and this is what I want to do in law school, all in your personal statement. Most people choose to focus more on themselves and their personal story and then talk about the sort of what I want to do in the future piece and what I want to do at your specific school in the separate statement. So I would definitely include somewhere the why Berkeley law piece, and it's up to you to figure out if you want to include it in your personal statement or if you want to write the separate why Berkeley statement. But somewhere should be included that information.
Would it be a bad idea to discuss 4 to 5 different things that all tie together with my specific interest?
So I'm assuming this is referencing the why Berkeley statement.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think I would recommend the one kind of figuring out 1 to 3 things. We work at this school. We don't expect you to have like a long list of everything you want to get involved in. So that's why I think it's better to focus on the sort of 2 or maybe 3 things that you're really excited about rather than trying to list everything in there and sort of really bouncing around a lot. So I would kind of try to focus it a little bit more.
There was a question related to resume, which will be on another webinar, but for the resume, Berkeley Law has some specific asks. Would you recommend submitting a standard resume and adding addenda for experiences we haven't addressed in other areas of the application?
Yeah, we see sort of both. We see because our resume actually there isn't a page limit, so if you wanted to include those in the resume itself, that's fine. We also see people that submit like a standard, 1 to 2 page resume and then have a separate sort of addenda section with like care for dependents, for example, that you might have not included. So because we don't have a page limit, I would say just go ahead and include it in the main resume. But if you really feel like you just want to do an addendum, that's fine as well.
So, okay, 2 more questions, you think?
Yeah, we can probably cover a couple more questions.
Okay, so this one hits home. So as a person of Indigenous descent, I'm not tribally affiliated due to a couple of factors, but I'm connected to my family members, impacted me in a primary reason for me seeking out a career in law. There are a lot of opinions online, but I found a clear answer whether writing a diversity statement would be wise since I don't have a formal recognition, nor did I grow up on tribal lands. Would it be better if I did or didn't fill out a diversity statement?
I'll defer to you on that one.
So as someone who does identify as Native and is, I grew up on a reservation, yes, you should still. This is an opportunity, and I think Alice has done a great job touching on all of these different narrative pieces. This is another opportunity to learn a different thing about you that we wouldn't have learned, that we likely would have learned through an interview process. So if your personal statement is something different where you are talking about what shaped your perspective, your identity, et cetera, and it's not touching upon some as being identifying as Native or Indigenous descent, definitely use the diversity statement as another method to talk about yourself. What are the things that how this perspective would be in the classroom? And if anything, you don't use it there, you could use it in a Y Berkeley because maybe you're interested in joining NALA, the Native American Law Association, the SLIPS program here, joining NALSA, the Native American Law Student Association. So there are different ways in which you can use that different piece. This one I think hits home to you in some ways. What resources are available for first gen and Latinx students?
Yeah, so for first gen, we have the Berkeley Law Opportunity Scholarship, which is our full tuition 3-year scholarship for first generation college graduates. So if you identify as first generation college grad, definitely go to our website to check out the Opportunity Scholarship. We also have profiles of the current scholars there as well for you to see who our current students are. And then beyond the scholarship, apply by December 15th if you're applying for the BLOS. And then beyond that, we also have many affinity organizations. So for Latinx identifying students, we have our La Alianza group. They are a large organization and they do sort of different networking events. Some of them are sponsored by local firms. And then it's also a great, social way to get to know other students, particularly second and third year students, if you're a first year student and get involved. And then another affinity group would be our first generation professionals group. So anybody that's first gen college or first in their family to go to a law professional school. And again, they put on events throughout the year. We just had 2 judges visit the school. And so they specifically met with our FGP group to kind of talk with the students about what it's like being a judge. And if you're pursuing a clerkship, what that would look like. So they do events like that throughout the year. And then they also have a mentorship program as well, where they'll match you with a second or third year student. And then they'll also match you with an alum who's first gen as well. So there are many groups. Joseph also mentioned like the Native American Law Student Association. So those are all on our student organizations page. Most of them have their own emails as well. So you could also reach out to those groups if you're looking for more information. So I think that brings us to the end of the session. This is going to be emailed out to everybody, the recording, and then there's also an opportunity for you to ask any other questions that we might have not been able to answer, since we were just limited in time today. So don't feel like you can't ask that, and we're happy to respond via that email if you have any other questions. So thanks everybody so much for joining. Good luck working on all of your narrative pieces of the statement, and we hope to see your applications. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.